The morning mist clung to the ancient stone walls of Whitmore Manor like secrets waiting to be unveiled. Margaret Whitmore stood at her bedroom window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the elaborate gardens that had been in her family for 6 generations. At 62, she carried herself with the practiced elegance of someone born into privilege, yet beneath her composed exterior lurked a desperation that grew stronger with each passing day. The emerald ring sat heavy in her jewelry box, its brilliant green stone catching the early sunlight that filtered through the heavy curtains. It wasn't just any ring. It was the Whitmore heritage ring, passed down through the family for over 2 centuries. Legend claimed it brought prosperity to the bloodline, but Margaret knew better. The ring's true power lay not in superstition, but in its estimated worth of $12 million, a sum that could solve her family's mounting financial crisis. Her son Alexander had been heir to the Whitmore fortune since birth, groomed from childhood to inherit not just wealth, but responsibility. Now 45, he possessed his mother's sharp intelligence and his late father's commanding presence. Alexander's marriage to Vivian Blackwell 3 years prior had been celebrated as the union of 2 prestigious families, bringing together old money and new influence. Vivian, a successful businesswoman in her own right, had brought substantial assets to the marriage, including her own collection of priceless jewelry and a portfolio of international investments. However, the family dynamics had shifted dramatically when Alexander's younger brother James married Catherine Mills just 18 months ago. Catherine, or Kate as she preferred, came from humble beginnings. Her father was a respected university professor, her mother a social worker. While her background lacked the aristocratic pedigree the Whitmores typically favored, Kate possessed an intelligence and integrity that even Margaret grudgingly respected. The financial troubles had begun subtly, hidden behind the facade of continued luxury. Poor investments, economic downturns, and Alexander's expensive political ambitions had slowly drained the family coffers. Margaret had managed to keep the extent of their problems secret, but the walls were closing in. The estate required constant maintenance, the staff needed their salaries, and several business ventures were demanding immediate capital injections. That morning, as Margaret prepared for what would become a pivotal family breakfast, she made a decision that would set everything in motion. The heritage ring would have to be sold, but she couldn't simply announce this devastating news. The ring represented more than money. It symbolized the family's legacy, their connection to centuries of tradition. If word got out that the Whitmores were selling their most treasured heirloom, it would signal their financial ruin to society. Her plan was elegantly simple in its deception. She would claim the ring was missing, perhaps stolen, allowing her to collect insurance money while secretly arranging a private sale through discreet channels. The insurance policy alone was worth $8 million, and she had contacts who could arrange a black market sale for the remainder. It would buy them time to recover their losses and maintain their reputation. Margaret carefully removed the ring from its velvet-lined box, studying the intricate craftsmanship one final time. The emerald was flawless, surrounded by perfectly cut diamonds that had sparkled at countless family celebrations. Her own grandmother had worn this ring, as had her mother. The weight of tradition pressed down on her shoulders as she slipped the ring into a hidden compartment in her desk. Vivian arrived for breakfast precisely at 9, as always. She glided into the dining room wearing a cream-colored silk blouse and tailored trousers, her auburn hair perfectly styled. Despite their cordial relationship, Margaret had never warmed to her daughter-in-law. Vivian was efficient, successful, and devoted to Alexander, but there was something calculating in her emerald eyes that reminded Margaret uncomfortably of herself at that age. "Good morning, Mother Whitmore," Vivian said, settling into her usual chair. "Alexander sends his apologies. He had to leave early for that meeting with the development committee." Margaret nodded, pouring coffee from the antique silver service. Of course, these political pursuits of his require such dedication. James and Kate arrived shortly after, bringing with them an energy that contrasted sharply with the formal atmosphere Vivian maintained. James, at 38, possessed a more relaxed version of his brother's charisma, while Kate's genuine warmth had a way of making even the grandest rooms feel welcoming. "Morning, everyone," Kate said cheerfully, kissing Margaret's cheek before taking her seat. She wore a simple blue dress that flattered her figure without being ostentatious, and her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant but uncomplicated style. As they began their meal, Margaret observed the subtle dynamics at play. Vivian dominated conversations about social events and business matters, clearly positioning herself as the family's future matriarch. Kate, meanwhile, listened attentively and asked thoughtful questions, showing genuine interest in everyone's concerns. The conversation turned to the upcoming charity gala the family was hosting, an annual event that brought together the city's most influential citizens. It was also one of the largest expenses the family faced each year, typically costing upwards of $500,000 to organize properly. "I've been reviewing the budget," Vivian announced, consulting her tablet. "We'll need to be more strategic this year. Perhaps we could reduce some of the decorative elements, find more cost-effective catering options." Margaret felt her chest tighten. Any reduction in the gala's grandeur would signal financial difficulties to their social circle. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "The Whitmore Charity Gala has a reputation to maintain. We cannot appear diminished." Kate noticed the tension in Margaret's voice. Over the past months, she had observed small changes in the household, staff reductions, delayed maintenance projects, cheaper wine at dinner. Her background had taught her to recognize the signs of financial stress, even when carefully concealed. "Perhaps there are other ways to manage costs without compromising quality," Kate suggested diplomatically. "I have some contacts in event planning who might offer better rates for family friends." Vivian's smile was polite, but cool. "That's thoughtful, Kate. But I'm sure our usual vendors will accommodate our needs." The underlying message was clear. Kate's middle-class connections weren't suitable for a Whitmore event. James squeezed his wife's hand supportively under the table, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by either Margaret or Vivian. After breakfast, Margaret excused herself to make what she claimed were routine calls to household staff. In reality, she was setting her plan in motion. First, she called her insurance agent, a discreet man who had handled the family's policies for decades. "Richard, I need to report a concerning incident," she said, modulating her voice to convey just the right amount of distress. "The heritage ring appears to be missing from my jewelry box. I've searched everywhere, but I fear it may have been stolen." The conversation that followed was carefully orchestrated. Margaret had always been meticulous about documentation, and she provided detailed information about when she had last seen the ring, who had access to her private chambers, and the security measures in place. Richard assured her that an investigation would begin immediately, and adjusters would arrive within 24 hours. Her second call was to Marcus Thornfield, an art dealer with connections to wealthy collectors who preferred discretion in their acquisitions. Margaret had known Marcus for years through various social functions, and she was aware of his reputation for handling transactions that required absolute confidentiality. "Marcus, darling, I find myself in need of your particular expertise," she said, her tone carefully casual. "I have an item of significant value that requires a very private sale, something that cannot appear in public records or auction houses." Marcus understood immediately. His clientele often included individuals who needed to liquidate assets quietly, whether for financial reasons or more complex personal matters. They arranged to meet the following week at his private gallery, where Margaret would bring detailed photographs and documentation for authentication. As she concluded her calls, Margaret felt a mixture of relief and guilt. The plan was in motion, but the weight of deceiving her family pressed heavily on her conscience. She had always prided herself on her integrity, yet circumstances had driven her to measures she would have found unthinkable just months earlier. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Margaret decided to plant the seeds of her deception. She chose her moment carefully, waiting until dessert was being served and everyone was relaxed. "I've had the most troubling experience today," she began, her voice carrying just the right note of concern. "I went to retrieve the heritage ring for cleaning before the gala, and it's not in its usual place." The reaction was immediate and varied. James looked genuinely alarmed. Kate appeared concerned, and Vivian's expression shifted to one of sharp attention. "Are you certain?" Alexander asked, setting down his coffee cup. He had returned from his meetings looking tired and stressed, and this news clearly added to his burden. "I've searched everywhere," Margaret continued. "I've checked all my jewelry boxes, even looked in places where I might have absent-mindedly set it down. It's simply not there." Vivian leaned forward, her business mind immediately engaging with the problem. "When did you last see it? Who has had access to your private rooms?" "I wore it to the Henderson wedding last month," Margaret replied, having prepared this timeline carefully. "I remember putting it away properly afterward, but with all the recent social engagements, I couldn't say for certain when I last checked on it." Kate felt a chill of unease. She had noticed Margaret wearing the ring at various events, and It seemed unlike the meticulous woman to simply misplace something so valuable. More troubling was the timing, just when they had been discussing the costs of the upcoming gala. "Should we call the police?" James suggested. "If it's been stolen." "Not yet," Margaret interrupted quickly. "I'd prefer to conduct a thorough search first. Perhaps one of the staff moved it during cleaning, or it's in a safe I've forgotten about. These old houses have so many hiding places." Alexander nodded, understanding his mother's desire to avoid scandal. "We'll organize a systematic search tomorrow. Check every room, every possible location. If we can't find it, then we'll involve the authorities." As the family dispersed for the evening, Kate lingered in the dining room, ostensibly helping to clear the table, but actually processing what she had heard. Something about Margaret's story didn't feel right. The older woman was too controlled, too prepared with explanations and timelines. Kate had grown up in a household where money was carefully managed, and nothing of value was ever misplaced without a thorough search. Her instincts, honed by years of observing her parents' careful financial stewardship, told her there was more to this story than a simple missing ring. That night, as she and James prepared for bed, Kate shared her concerns with her husband. "There's something strange about your mother's story," she said carefully, not wanting to accuse Margaret of deception but unable to ignore her intuition. James, loyal to his family but trusting his wife's judgment, considered her words. "What do you mean?" She was too calm, too prepared with answers. When something truly valuable goes missing, there's usually more panic, more immediate action. She seemed almost rehearsed. "You think she's lying?" James asked, shocked by the implication. Kate chose her words carefully. "I think she's under more pressure than she's letting on. I've noticed things around the house, small changes that suggest financial stress. Maybe she's doing something she feels she has to do, even if it's not entirely honest." The conversation planted a seed of doubt in James's mind. He loved his mother deeply, but he had also noticed the subtle signs Kate mentioned. The reduced staff, the delayed repairs, the way Margaret had become increasingly secretive about household finances. Meanwhile, in her own suite, Margaret stood before her vanity, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her had maintained her dignity through 6 decades of privilege, but, for the first time, she questioned whether she was strong enough to see her plan through to completion. The heritage ring lay hidden just feet away, in the secret compartment she had revealed to no one. Tomorrow would bring insurance investigators, family searches, and the beginning of an elaborate deception that would test every relationship she held dear. She thought of her late husband, Robert, and wondered what he would say about her actions. He had been a man of absolute integrity, someone who believed that honest poverty was preferable to dishonest wealth. But he had never faced the complete destruction of everything their family had built over generations. As Margaret prepared for bed, she whispered a quiet prayer for forgiveness, knowing that the path she had chosen would lead her further from the woman she had always believed herself to be. The ring might solve their immediate financial crisis, but the cost to her soul was something she couldn't yet calculate. The stage was set for revelations that would shake the Whitmore family to its foundation, though none of them could yet imagine how dramatically their lives were about to change. In the quiet of the night, with secrets hidden and plans in motion, the ancient house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm that was surely coming. Kate lay awake beside her sleeping husband, her mind turning over every detail of the evening's conversation. Her instincts told her that the truth about the heritage ring was far more complex than Margaret's carefully crafted story suggested, and she resolved to pay closer attention to the family dynamics in the coming days. Little did she know that her natural curiosity and keen observation skills would soon uncover secrets that would challenge everything the Whitmore family believed about loyalty, tradition, and the true cost of maintaining appearances in a world built on centuries of inherited privilege. The insurance investigator arrived at Whitmore Manor exactly 24 hours after Margaret's call, just as promised. Detective Inspector Sarah Chun was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an unassuming manner that often led people to underestimate her capabilities. She had spent 15 years investigating high-value insurance claims, and she possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect inconsistencies in even the most carefully constructed stories. Margaret met Detective Chun at the front entrance, dressed immaculately in a navy blue suit that projected both vulnerability and dignity. She had spent the morning preparing for this encounter, rehearsing her story until it felt natural, practicing the right amount of distress without appearing overly dramatic. "Detective Chun, thank you for coming so quickly," Margaret said, extending her hand with just the right tremor of anxiety. This situation has been terribly unsettling for our entire family. Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. I understand how distressing these situations can be, Detective Chun replied, her voice professional but warm. I'd like to begin by examining your private chambers, if that's acceptable. Then, I'll need to speak with everyone who has had access to your jewelry collection. As they walked through the grand hallways toward Margaret's suite, Detective Chin's trained eye cataloged every detail. The house was magnificent, but showed subtle signs of deferred maintenance, slightly faded wallpaper, carpets that needed replacement, paintings with frames that could use restoration. These weren't necessarily signs of financial distress, but they suggested a family that might be watching expenses more carefully than in the past. Margaret's bedroom suite was a masterpiece of understated luxury. The jewelry collection was housed in a custom-built armoire with multiple drawers and compartments, each lined with velvet and equipped with individual lighting. Detective Chun estimated the collection's total value at several $1,000,000, making the missing heritage ring just one piece in an extraordinary assemblage. This is where the ring was kept? Detective Chun asked, examining the empty velvet indentation where the ring typically rested. Yes, always in this exact spot, Margaret replied, her voice carrying a note of sadness. My mother taught me the importance of keeping precious things in their designated places. The ring has been stored here for over 30 years. Detective Chun made careful notes, photographing the jewelry case from multiple angles. She observed that the collection appeared to be organized methodically, with each piece having its specific location. The missing ring had clearly been an important centerpiece, positioned prominently in the center of the main display area. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask about household staff, family members, and any recent visitors who might have had access to this room, Detective Chin said, pulling out her tablet to record the interview. Margaret had anticipated this line of questioning and responded smoothly. The household staff consists of 8 full-time employees, all of whom have been with our family for at least 5 years. Our housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, has been here for 23 years. I trust them completely. What about family members? My 2 sons live here with their wives. Alexander and Vivian have the East Wing, James and Catherine have the West Wing. We also frequently host guests for dinner parties and social events, though they typically don't venture into the private family areas. Detective Chun made notes about each family member, planning to interview them individually. When was the last time you definitely remember seeing the ring? I wore it to the Henderson wedding on September 15th, Margaret replied without hesitation. I specifically remember because I coordinated it with my emerald necklace and earrings for the occasion. I removed all the jewelry when I returned home that evening and placed everything in its proper location. That was 6 weeks ago. Have you had occasion to check on the ring since then? Margaret paused, appearing to think carefully. Not specifically. I don't examine my jewelry collection daily unless I'm selecting pieces to wear. The heritage ring is typically reserved for our most formal occasions. Detective Chun found this response curious. In her experience, people with valuable jewelry collections often checked on their most prized pieces regularly, even if they weren't wearing them. However, she kept this observation to herself for the moment. The investigator spent the next hour examining the room for signs of forced entry, checking windows and doors, and photographing everything from multiple angles. The security system showed no breaches, and there were no obvious signs that anyone had searched through Margaret's belongings. I'd like to speak with your sons and their wives now, if that's possible, Detective Chin said. Margaret arranged for the family to gather in the library, a comfortable room lined with leather-bound books and furnished with antique chairs that had witnessed countless family meetings over the generations. Alexander arrived first, still wearing a business suit from his morning meetings, followed by Vivian, who appeared composed but clearly concerned about the situation. James and Kate joined them a few minutes later. Kate had changed from her casual morning attire into a more formal dress, understanding instinctively that this was a serious family matter requiring appropriate dress. Detective Chin began with Alexander, questioning him about his knowledge of the ring and when he had last seen it. Alexander's responses were straightforward and cooperative, though she noticed he seemed more concerned about the potential insurance implications than the emotional significance of losing a family heirloom. The ring has enormous sentimental value, of course, Alexander said, but it's also a significant asset for the family. The insurance coverage is substantial, and any delay in processing the claim could create complications for our other financial obligations. Vivian's interview revealed a sharp, analytical mind focused on practical matters. She provided detailed information about the security system, household routines, and family schedules with the precision of someone accustomed to managing complex logistical operations. I've noticed that Mother Whitmore has been more concerned about security lately, Vivian offered. She's mentioned several times that the jewelry collection should be appraised and the insurance coverage reviewed. Perhaps her instincts were warning her of potential problems. When Detective Chen interviewed James, she found a man genuinely distressed about his mother's loss, but also confused by some aspects of the situation. It's strange, James admitted. Mother has always been incredibly careful with her jewelry. She has specific routines for everything, and she never deviates from them. For something like this to simply disappear seems completely out of character for how she manages her possessions. Kate's interview proved to be the most revealing, though Detective Chun didn't realize it immediately. Kate answered all questions honestly and thoroughly, but her responses revealed someone who had been paying close attention to family dynamics and household changes. Mrs. Whitmore has seemed more stressed lately, Kate observed. She's always carried herself with such confidence, but over the past few months, I've noticed she seems more worried about things, more concerned about expenses and household management. Can you give me specific examples? Detective Chen asked. Kate hesitated, not wanting to betray family confidences, but recognizing the importance of providing accurate information. Small things, really. She's been more particular about turning off lights, more concerned about food waste, more involved in reviewing household bills. It's not dramatic, but it's noticeable if you're paying attention. Detective Chun made careful notes. In her experience, sudden increases in financial consciousness often indicated underlying money pressures. She filed this information away for further consideration. After completing the family interviews, Detective Chin spoke with the household staff. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper, was particularly helpful. She had noticed nothing unusual about Mrs. Whitmore's behavior or anyone suspicious around the house. But she confirmed Kate's observations about increased attention to household expenses. Mrs. Whitmore has always been a careful manager, Mrs. Patterson explained, but lately she's been asking more questions about bills, requesting more detailed reports about household expenditures. I assumed she was just being more thorough. As Detective Chun concluded her initial investigation, she felt the familiar tickle of intuition that told her this case was more complex than it appeared. The family's responses had been cooperative and seemingly honest, but there were undercurrents of tension and financial concern that didn't quite fit with a straightforward theft. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the atmosphere was noticeably strained. The investigation had forced everyone to confront the reality of their situation, and different perspectives on the missing ring were becoming apparent. I still think we should hire private security, Vivian announced as they began their meal. If someone has targeted our family, they might return for other items. That seems premature, Margaret replied carefully. We don't even know if the ring was stolen or simply misplaced. Kate found herself studying Margaret's behavior more closely than ever before. The older woman seemed remarkably composed for someone who had lost an irreplaceable family heirloom. Most people in similar situations would be devastated, angry, or at least more visibly upset. Mother, James said gently, perhaps we should consider that the ring might really be gone. If it was stolen, we need to accept that reality and move forward. Margaret's response was swift and emphatic. Absolutely not. That ring represents 5 generations of family history. I refuse to give up hope that it will be recovered. Alexander looked up from his phone, where he had been reviewing emails. The insurance adjuster wants to schedule a formal appraisal of the remaining collection. They'll also need documentation of any recent changes to our financial situation. Kate noticed Margaret's brief but unmistakable flinch at the mention of financial documentation. It was a subtle reaction, gone almost immediately, but it confirmed Kate's growing suspicion that money was playing a larger role in this situation than anyone was acknowledging. After dinner, Kate excused herself to check on some wedding planning details, but instead made her way to the library where she could think privately. She had been turning over the day's events in her mind, and several things were bothering her about the official story. First, Margaret's calmness seemed unnatural. Kate had seen her mother-in-law genuinely upset about far less significant matters, yet she was maintaining remarkable composure about losing an irreplaceable family treasure. Second, the timing was suspicious. The ring went missing just when the family was facing increased expenses for the charity gala and other social obligations. Kate's background had taught her to look for patterns, and this one was troubling. Third, Margaret's immediate focus on insurance rather than recovery seemed telling. Most people would exhaust every possibility of finding a missing item before turning to insurance claims. As Kate sat in the quiet library, surrounded by generations of Whitmore family history, she made a decision that would prove to be pivotal. She would conduct her own investigation, quietly and carefully, to determine whether her growing suspicions had any foundation. The next morning, while Margaret was meeting with the insurance adjuster and the rest of the family was busy with their respective obligations, Kate began her careful examination of the house. She started with Margaret's suite, not to search for the ring, but to better understand the older woman's habits and state of mind. In Margaret's desk, Kate found carefully organized financial documents that painted a concerning picture. While she didn't examine anything too closely, that would have been a violation of privacy. She couldn't help but notice past due notices, letters from investment advisors discussing necessary adjustments, and correspondence with the bank about restructuring certain obligations. Kate's heart sank as she realized the extent of the family's financial problems. Margaret wasn't just worried about expenses. She was likely facing genuine financial crisis. This discovery didn't prove that Margaret had done anything wrong, but it certainly provided a motive for desperate actions. Meanwhile, Margaret was enduring a thorough interview with the insurance adjuster, a meticulous man named Robert Fleming who had processed millions of dollars in claims over his 30-year career. Fleming's questions were probing and detailed, designed to uncover any inconsistencies or potential fraud. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to understand your family's current financial situation," Fleming said, consulting his tablet. "Recent changes in income or assets can sometimes be relevant to theft claims." Margaret felt her chest tighten, but maintained her composed exterior. "Our family's finances are stable, Mr. Fleming. We've faced some challenges with recent market fluctuations, as have many families of our generation, but nothing that would compromise our ability to maintain our insurance coverage. Of course, I'm simply required to ask these questions as part of our standard process. Now, regarding the ring's documentation, do you have recent appraisals, photographs, or gemological certificates?" Margaret produced a leather portfolio containing decades of documentation about the heritage ring. The paperwork was thorough and authentic, showing a clear chain of ownership and increasing valuations over time. Fleming made copies of everything, noting the ring's most recent appraisal value of $12 million. "This is an extraordinary piece," Fleming observed, studying the detailed photographs. "The insurance coverage is quite substantial. Are you confident about the security measures that were in place?" "Absolutely confident," Margaret replied. "The house has a comprehensive security system, the staff is completely trustworthy, and the ring was always kept in a secure location. I can only conclude that someone with specific knowledge of our family's routines was responsible for the theft." Fleming made careful notes, his expression revealing nothing about his thoughts. In reality, he was finding Margaret's case both compelling and concerning. The documentation was perfect, almost too perfect, and her composure seemed inconsistent with the emotional impact of losing such a significant family heirloom. As the insurance investigation continued, family dynamics were shifting in subtle but important ways. Vivian had begun positioning herself as the family's crisis manager, taking charge of security arrangements and financial planning with an efficiency that impressed everyone but also highlighted the power vacuum that Margaret's distress had created. James was struggling with conflicting loyalties between supporting his mother and addressing his own growing doubts about her story. His wife's observations had planted seeds of suspicion that he couldn't entirely dismiss, even though he desperately wanted to believe in his mother's integrity. Kate found herself in the most difficult position of all. She was developing serious concerns about Margaret's honesty, but she had no proof and couldn't risk destroying family relationships without solid evidence. She decided to continue her careful observation and investigation, hoping to either confirm Margaret's innocence or gather enough evidence to address the situation appropriately. That evening, as the household settled into an uneasy routine around the ongoing investigation, Margaret stood once again before her hidden compartment, looking at the heritage ring that everyone believed to be stolen. The weight of her deception was becoming heavier each day, and she wondered how long she could maintain the elaborate fiction she had created. The ring seemed to pulse with accusation in the dim light, its emerald depths reflecting not just her image but her guilt. She had convinced herself that she was protecting her family's future, but as the investigation deepened and the lies multiplied, Margaret began to question whether the price of salvation might be higher than the cost of honest poverty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the insurance company expanded their investigation and the family continued their own search efforts. The truth about the heritage ring remained hidden, but the careful balance of secrets and lies that Margaret had constructed was beginning to show dangerous cracks. Kate's intuitive understanding of her mother-in-law's character would prove to be both a blessing and a curse, as her investigation brought her closer to revelations that would change the Whitmore family forever. The stage was set for confrontations that would test every relationship and force each family member to choose between loyalty and truth. In the growing tension of Whitmore Manor, ancient secrets were stirring, and the consequences of Margaret's desperate gamble were beginning to ripple outward in ways she could never have anticipated. The charity gala was exactly 1 week away when Kate made the discovery that would shatter the careful facade Margaret had constructed. It happened by accident, as many life-changing revelations do, when Kate was helping Mrs. Patterson organize Margaret's study for the arrival of additional insurance investigators. "Mrs. Kate, could you help me move these boxes from the lower cabinet?" Mrs. Patterson asked, gesturing toward an ornate wooden cabinet that had belonged to Margaret's grandmother. "The investigators want to examine every room where valuables might have been stored." Kate knelt beside the elderly housekeeper, carefully lifting out several boxes of photographs and documents. As they worked, one of the boxes caught on something inside the cabinet, and Kate reached deeper to free it. Her fingers found what felt like a hidden lever, and when she pressed it, a small panel in the back of the cabinet clicked open. "Mrs. Patterson, did you know about this secret compartment?" Kate asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The housekeeper peered over Kate's shoulder, her eyes widening in surprise. "In all my years here, I never knew that cabinet had any hidden spaces. The old master was full of surprises, but I thought I'd discovered them all." Kate hesitated for a moment, understanding that whatever lay hidden in this compartment might change everything. With trembling fingers, she reached inside and felt the unmistakable shape of a jewelry box. Her heart pounded as she carefully withdrew a small velvet case that seemed to pulse with significance in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the study windows. She opened the case slowly, though she already knew what she would find. The heritage ring lay nestled in white satin, its emerald heart catching the light with an almost accusatory brilliance. The diamonds surrounding the central stone seemed to mock her with their perfect clarity, each facet reflecting the magnitude of the deception they had witnessed. Mrs. Patterson gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, my dear Lord, it's the heritage ring. But how can this be?" Kate stared at the ring, her mind racing through the implications of what she had discovered. Margaret hadn't lost the ring or had it stolen. She had hidden it herself, deliberately and carefully, while orchestrating an elaborate insurance fraud. The realization hit Kate like a physical blow, leaving her breathless with the weight of what this meant for the family. "Mrs. Patterson," Kate said carefully, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart, "I need you to promise me something. We cannot speak of this to anyone until I've had time to think about how to handle this situation." The loyal housekeeper nodded, understanding instinctively that they had uncovered something that would devastate the family if mishandled. "Of course, Mrs. Kate. But what are we going to do? This changes everything." Kate closed the jewelry box and placed it carefully back in the hidden compartment, her hands shaking with the magnitude of the secret she now carried. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I need time to understand Margaret's reasons and figure out the best way to address this without destroying the family." That evening, Kate struggled to maintain her composure during dinner, acutely aware of the ring hidden just rooms away, while Margaret continued her performance of distressed victim. Every word of sympathy offered to Margaret felt like a knife in Kate's chest, and she found herself studying her mother-in-law's face for any sign of remorse or guilt. "The investigators have expanded their inquiry to include the household staff," Margaret announced, her voice carrying just the right note of reluctant necessity. "I hate subjecting our loyal employees to suspicion, but the insurance company insists on a thorough investigation." Kate's stomach churned as she realized that innocent people were being questioned and investigated because of Margaret's deception. The household staff, who had served the family faithfully for years, were now under scrutiny for a crime they hadn't committed. "That seems unnecessarily invasive," James said, echoing Kate's thoughts. "These people have been part of our family for years. Surely there are other possibilities to explore." Alexander looked up from his tablet, where he had been reviewing legal documents. The insurance company has the right to conduct a thorough investigation. We need their cooperation if we're going to recover the ring's value. What if the ring is never recovered? Kate asked quietly, testing the waters of the conversation. What if this isn't about theft at all, but about something else entirely? Margaret's response was swift and sharp. What are you suggesting, Catherine? I'm not suggesting anything specific, Kate replied carefully. I'm simply wondering if we might be making assumptions about what happened. Perhaps the ring wasn't stolen by an outsider. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tensions. Vivian looked intrigued by the possibility of a more complex explanation, while Alexander appeared annoyed by any suggestion that might complicate the insurance claim. James watched his wife carefully, recognizing that she was working toward some larger point. Margaret's composure never wavered, but Kate noticed a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested the older woman was evaluating this new direction in the conversation. Family members stealing from each other? Margaret said with what appeared to be genuine shock. Catherine, that's a terrible accusation to make without any evidence. I'm not accusing anyone, Kate clarified. I'm simply saying that we might want to consider all possibilities before we subject the staff to intensive investigation. Later that evening, Kate found herself alone in the garden, walking the paths where she had often sought solace during difficult moments in her marriage to James. The weight of her discovery pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden, and she struggled to understand Margaret's motivations and determine her own responsibilities. She thought about the financial documents she had glimpsed in Margaret's desk, the subtle signs of money troubles that had been evident for months. Margaret wasn't a villain. She was a woman facing the potential destruction of everything her family had built over centuries, driven to desperate measures by circumstances beyond her control. Yet the deception was still wrong, still harmful to innocent people, and destructive to family relationships. Kate wrestled with the question of loyalty. Did she owe greater allegiance to Margaret's privacy and the family's reputation, or to the truth and the innocent staff members being investigated? As she walked, Kate noticed James approaching from the house, his expression concerned and questioning. He had clearly recognized that something was troubling her more than usual. Kate, what's really bothering you about this whole situation? He asked, taking her hand as they continued along the garden path. I know you well enough to recognize when you're working through something significant. Kate stopped walking, turning to face her husband in the moonlight. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than she had expected, and she realized she couldn't carry this burden alone any longer. James, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise that you'll listen to everything before you react, she said, her voice serious and steady. Of course, he replied, though she could see alarm growing in his eyes. Kate took a deep breath and told him about finding the ring, about the hidden compartment, about the carefully orchestrated deception that had engulfed their entire family. James listened in stunned silence, his expression shifting from disbelief to shock to a deep sadness as the implications became clear. You're certain it was the heritage ring? He asked finally. Absolutely certain. There's no mistaking it. James sat down heavily on a nearby bench, running his hands through his hair as he processed what Kate had told him. My mother is committing insurance fraud, he said quietly, as if saying the words aloud might make them less true. She's desperate, James. I've seen the financial documents, the bills, the letters from creditors. She's not doing this from greed. She's trying to save the family from financial ruin. But she's destroying innocent people in the process, James replied, his voice heavy with grief. The staff, the family relationships, her own integrity. This isn't the woman who raised me. Kate sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. What are we going to do? James was quiet for a long time, staring out at the gardens that had been his playground as a child, that represented generations of family history and tradition. Finally, he spoke. We have to confront her. We have to give her the chance to stop this before it goes any further. If she won't listen to reason, then we'll have no choice but to expose the truth. And if she refuses? If she continues with the fraud? Then we protect the innocent people being hurt by her choices, even if it means destroying our family in the process. The next morning, Margaret was reviewing insurance documents in her study when James and Kate requested a private meeting with her. She agreed readily, assuming they wanted to discuss the ongoing investigation or perhaps offer additional support during this difficult time. The confrontation that followed would forever change the dynamics of the Whitmore family. James began carefully, expressing his love and respect for his mother while also conveying his growing concerns about the investigation. Mother, Kate, and I have been discussing the situation with the ring, and we're worried about the direction this investigation is taking, James said, choosing his words with diplomatic precision. Margaret looked up from her papers, her expression alert, but not yet alarmed. What specific concerns do you have? Kate took a breath, knowing that the next words would irrevocably alter their relationship. We know about the hidden compartment in the cabinet. We know the ring is still in the house. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's face went through a series of expressions: shock, calculation, and, finally, a mask of defensive dignity that Kate recognized as her response to serious threats. I don't know what you think you've discovered, Margaret said finally, but I won't have my integrity questioned based on speculation and accusations. It's not speculation, James said gently but firmly. We've seen the ring, Mother. We know where you've hidden it. Margaret stood up slowly, her composure beginning to crack for the first time since the entire ordeal began. You searched my private study without permission? We were helping Mrs. Patterson prepare for the investigators, Kate explained. The discovery was accidental, but the ring is definitely there. For a moment, Margaret appeared to be considering denial or deflection, but something in her son's eyes told her that further deception would be pointless. The careful structure of lies she had built began to crumble as the weight of truth pressed down upon her. You have no idea what pressures I've been facing, Margaret said finally, her voice breaking slightly. This family is on the edge of financial ruin. Everything we've built over 6 generations is about to be lost, and I was trying to find a way to save it. By committing insurance fraud? James asked, his voice filled with pain. By destroying the reputation and integrity that our family has maintained for centuries. Margaret sank back into her chair, the fight going out of her as the full impact of exposure settled in. I never intended for it to go this far. I thought I could manage everything quietly, solve our problems without anyone knowing how desperate things had become. Kate felt a surge of sympathy for the older woman, even as she recognized the magnitude of the wrong that had been committed. Margaret, we understand the pressure you are under, but innocent people are being hurt by this deception. The staff, the insurance company, even the family relationships are being damaged. What do you want me to do? Margaret asked, her voice small and defeated. If I admit the truth now, I'll face criminal charges. The scandal will destroy what little is left of our reputation. James leaned forward, his expression combining firmness with compassion. You have to end this, Mother. You have to find a way to stop the investigation without completing the fraud. The alternative is watching you destroy yourself and everyone around you. The three of them sat in the quiet study, surrounded by generations of family history, facing a crisis that would test every value they claimed to hold dear. Margaret's desperate gamble had been exposed, but the path forward remained uncertain and fraught with potential disaster. Outside the study windows, the grounds of Whitmore Manor continued their ancient routines, unaware that the family that had maintained them for centuries was facing the greatest crisis in their long and distinguished history. The heritage ring, still hidden in its secret compartment, had become not a symbol of prosperity, but a curse that threatened to destroy everything the family had worked to build. The confrontation was only the beginning. The real challenges would come in the hours and days ahead, as Margaret faced the consequences of her choices, and the family struggled to find a path forward that preserved both justice and the relationships that bound them together. The hours following Kate's confrontation with Margaret transformed the atmosphere at Whitmore Manor from one of concerned solidarity to barely concealed tension. Margaret had agreed to consider her options, but she had made no commitments about how she would resolve the devastating situation she had created. The weight of the secret now shared by 3 family members created an undercurrent of strain that affected every interaction. Alexander remained completely unaware of the revelation, continuing to coordinate with insurance investigators and legal advisors as if the case were progressing normally. His focus on the practical aspects of the claim, the financial recovery, the legal implications, the family's reputation, had blinded him to the subtle changes in family dynamics happening around him. Vivian, however, possessed the sharp observational skills that had made her successful in business, and she quickly noticed that something significant had shifted. During breakfast the morning after the confrontation, she observed the careful way James and Kate interacted with Margaret, the pregnant silences that punctuated their conversations, and Margaret's uncharacteristic distraction. "Margaret, you seem particularly troubled this morning," Vivian commented, her tone expressing concern while her eyes searched for clues. "Is there some development in the investigation that we should know about?" Margaret looked up from her untouched coffee, realizing she had been staring into space while her mind wrestled with impossible choices. I'm simply tired of living under this cloud of suspicion and uncertainty, she replied carefully. The stress is more exhausting than I expected. Kate felt the weight of shared knowledge as she watched Margaret navigate the conversation. The older woman was clearly struggling with the burden of maintaining her deception while knowing that her closest family members were aware of the truth. After breakfast, Vivian cornered Alexander in his study, where he was reviewing correspondence from his political advisors about how the insurance investigation might affect his public image. Alexander, I think there's something going on with your family that we're not being told about, Vivian said directly, her business instincts alerting her to hidden agendas and unspoken communications. Alexander looked up from his papers, annoyed by the interruption. What do you mean? Mother is dealing with the theft of an irreplaceable family heirloom. Of course she's upset. It's not just Margaret. James and Kate are acting strangely too. There are conversations happening that we're not part of, and I think they know something about the ring that they're not sharing. That's ridiculous, Alexander replied dismissively. If James knew something about the ring, he would have shared it immediately. We're all working toward the same goal. Vivian wasn't convinced, but she recognized that Alexander's loyalty to his family made him blind to the possibility of deception within their ranks. She decided to conduct her own investigation, using the analytical skills that had made her a formidable business negotiator. Meanwhile, Margaret was meeting with Marcus Thornfield at his private gallery, ostensibly to finalize arrangements for the discreet sale that would provide the financial relief she desperately needed. Marcus had assembled authentication equipment and prepared confidential purchase agreements for collectors who specialized in acquiring unique pieces without public documentation. Margaret, darling, I must say this is all very mysterious, Marcus commented as he prepared his authentication equipment. You've been quite secretive about the provenance details, and I do need substantial documentation to satisfy my buyers. Margaret felt panic rising in her chest as she realized she had no way to complete the transaction. The ring was hidden at home, but she couldn't retrieve it without risking exposure, and she couldn't explain to Marcus why the promised sale couldn't proceed. Marcus, I'm afraid there have been some complications, she said carefully. The family is dealing with some additional legal issues that might delay our arrangement. Marcus studied her face with the practiced eye of someone who had navigated countless delicate transactions involving desperate sellers. Margaret, if you're facing financial pressures, there might be other solutions we could explore. However, I cannot proceed without the actual item and proper documentation. Of course, I'll need to resolve the family situation before we can move forward. As Margaret drove home from the gallery, she felt the walls closing in around her. The insurance investigation was intensifying. James and Kate were pressuring her to confess, and now she couldn't even complete the sale that was supposed to solve their financial crisis. Every option seemed to lead toward exposure and disgrace. That afternoon, Detective Inspector Chun returned to Whitmore Manor for a follow-up interview, bringing with her additional investigators and more sophisticated equipment for examining the crime scene. She had spent the intervening days researching the family's background and financial situation, and her instincts were telling her that this case was more complex than a simple theft. Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like to go over your timeline again, with particular attention to the specific security measures you follow with valuable jewelry, Detective Chun said, settling into a chair in the library where the family had gathered for the interview. Margaret felt every muscle in her body tense as she prepared to repeat the carefully constructed story she had told multiple times. However, she was acutely aware that James and Kate were watching her every word, and their knowledge of the truth made maintaining the deception exponentially more difficult. As I explained previously, I follow very specific routines with all valuable pieces, Margaret began, her voice steady despite her internal turmoil. The heritage ring was always kept in its designated location in my jewelry armoire. Detective Chun made notes while studying Margaret's body language and vocal patterns. Mrs. Whitmore, in my experience, people who lose items of enormous sentimental value typically remember very specific details about their last interactions with those items. Could you walk me through exactly what you did when you returned from the Henderson wedding? Margaret felt sweat forming despite the cool temperature in the library. I removed all my jewelry in my dressing room, cleaned each piece carefully as I always do, and placed everything in its proper location. Did anyone observe you following this routine that evening? No, I always handle my jewelry privately. It's a personal ritual that I've maintained for decades. Detective Chen nodded, but Kate could see that the investigator was paying close attention to inconsistencies and gaps in Margaret's responses. The detective's next question sent a chill through everyone in the room. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask directly. Is there any possibility that financial pressures might have influenced decisions regarding the ring? We've conducted standard background checks, and we're aware that your family has faced some investment challenges recently. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander looked shocked that their financial situation was being questioned. Vivian appeared to be rapidly processing new information, and Margaret struggled to maintain her composure under what felt like a direct attack. Detective Chun, I find that question both inappropriate and insulting, Margaret said, summoning all her dignity. Our family's financial affairs are private, and they have absolutely no bearing on the theft of my ring. I understand your reaction, and I apologize if the question seems intrusive. However, financial motivation is a common factor in insurance claims involving valuable items. I'm required to explore all possibilities. James felt compelled to respond, even though he knew his words might inadvertently reveal the family's secrets. Detective, my mother has maintained the highest standards of integrity throughout her life. While every family faces financial challenges, particularly in uncertain economic times, there is no situation that would drive her to compromise her values. Kate noticed that James's defense was carefully worded to be technically truthful while avoiding direct lies about their current knowledge. She admired his diplomatic skill even as she recognized how difficult this conversation was for him. Detective Chun concluded the interview without any dramatic revelations, but Kate could see that the investigator was far from satisfied with the family's responses. As the detective prepared to leave, she made a comment that sent chills through everyone who heard it. Mrs. Whitmore, I want to assure you that we will continue this investigation until we have complete clarity about what happened to your ring. In my experience, the truth has a way of emerging eventually, regardless of how well it might be hidden. After Detective Chen left, the family remained in the library, each person processing the implications of what had occurred. Alexander was the first to break the silence. Mother, I think we need to discuss our financial situation more openly, he said seriously. If the detective is asking these questions, other people will be too. We need to be prepared with consistent answers. Vivian nodded in agreement. Alexander is right. We need to understand exactly what our exposure is, both financially and legally. Margaret felt trapped by the closing circle of scrutiny and questioning. Our financial affairs are not suitable topics for family meetings, she said firmly. I have managed this family's resources successfully for decades, and I will continue to do so. But, Mother, James interjected gently, if there are problems we should know about, perhaps we can work together to find solutions. Keeping secrets only makes situations worse. The irony of James's statement was not lost on Kate, who recognized that they were all keeping the most significant secret of all. She watched Margaret's face carefully, searching for any sign that she might be ready to confess the truth. There are no secrets, Margaret insisted, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried in previous weeks. We are simply facing the same economic pressures that affect all families of our generation. That evening, Vivian approached Kate privately, having decided that direct questioning might yield better results than attempting to gather information through observation. Kate, I know something is happening that Alexander and I aren't being told about, Vivian said without preamble. I also know that you're too honest to maintain a deception indefinitely. What is going on with the ring? Kate felt the weight of impossible loyalties pressing down on her. She cared about Vivian and respected her intelligence, but she had promised James that they would handle the situation together. She also recognized that involving more family members in the secret might make resolution even more difficult. Vivian, I understand your frustration with feeling excluded from family discussions, Kate replied carefully. But some situations require time and careful consideration before they can be addressed openly. That sounds like confirmation that there is indeed something being hidden from us, Vivian observed. Kate, whatever is happening, hiding it from Alexander could damage his political career and our marriage. We deserve to know the truth. The conversation was interrupted by James's arrival, and Kate felt relief at having support in navigating Vivian's probing questions. What are you two discussing? James asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the topic. I was asking Kate about the family secrets that seemed to be circulating without including all family members, Vivian replied directly. James exchanged a look with Kate, recognizing that their time for private deliberation was running out. Vivian, There are some sensitive family matters that we're working through. When the time is right, everything will be discussed openly. That's not good enough, Vivian said firmly. If this family is facing a crisis that affects all of us, then we all deserve to participate in addressing it. As the three of them stood in the hallway outside the library, the weight of unspoken truths hung heavy in the air. Kate realized that Margaret's deception was creating ripples that extended far beyond the original crime, affecting relationships and trust throughout the family. The charity gala was now just 4 days away, and the heritage ring remained hidden in Margaret's study, a secret that grew more dangerous with each passing hour. The insurance investigation was intensifying, family relationships were straining under the pressure of hidden knowledge, and Margaret was running out of options for resolving the crisis she had created. The stage was set for revelations that would force every family member to choose between loyalty and truth, between protecting Margaret's reputation and preserving their own integrity. The ancient walls of Whitmore Manor had witnessed many family crises over the centuries, but none had posed such a fundamental threat to everything the family claimed to represent. The next 24 hours would prove decisive in determining whether the Whitmore family could survive the truth about the heritage ring, or whether Margaret's desperate gamble would destroy the very legacy she had been trying to save. The morning of the charity gala dawned gray and overcast, as if the weather itself was reflecting the storm that was about to break over Whitmore Manor. Kate woke before sunrise, her sleep having been fitful and interrupted by dreams of emerald rings and family confrontations. She knew that today would bring the crisis to its inevitable conclusion, one way or another. Margaret had spent the night in her study, ostensibly reviewing final preparations for the evening's event, but actually wrestling with the impossible choice between confession and continued deception. The heritage ring lay in its hidden compartment just feet away, its presence a constant reminder of how far she had fallen from the values she had always claimed to uphold. At 7 in the morning, Detective Inspector Chen arrived unannounced, accompanied by 2 additional investigators and a warrant to search the premises more thoroughly. The legal document granted them access to every room in the house, including private family quarters and storage areas that had not been examined during the initial investigation. Margaret met them at the front door, her composure intact despite the panic racing through her veins. Detective Chun, this seems rather dramatic for a routine follow-up investigation. Mrs. Whitmore, new information has come to light that requires a more comprehensive search, Detective Chun replied professionally. We've received anonymous tips suggesting that the ring might still be on the premises. Kate felt her heart stop as she realized the implications. Someone had provided information to the police, though she had no idea who might have broken their silence. She caught James's eye across the foyer and saw her own shock reflected in his expression. The search began in the main living areas and progressed systematically through the house. Margaret maintained her dignified protests about the intrusion, but Kate could see the older woman's increasing desperation as the investigators moved closer to her private study. Alexander had been summoned from an early morning meeting and arrived just as the search team reached the second floor. His face was dark with anger at what he perceived as harassment of his family. "This is completely unacceptable," Alexander announced to Detective Chun. "Our family has cooperated fully with your investigation, and we will not tolerate this violation of our privacy without substantial justification. Mr. Whitmore, we have legal authority for this search, and we're conducting it professionally and thoroughly," Detective Chun replied calmly. "If you have concerns about our methods, you're welcome to contact your attorney." Vivian arrived shortly afterward, having been alerted by Alexander's frantic phone call. She immediately assessed the situation with her characteristic analytical precision, recognizing that a police search warrant represented a serious escalation that suggested specific evidence or credible accusations. "What exactly are they looking for?" Vivian asked Kate quietly as they watched the investigators work. Kate struggled to maintain her composure while avoiding direct lies. "They mentioned anonymous tips about the ring still being in the house." "Anonymous tips from whom?" Vivian pressed. "Who would have information about the ring's location if it was actually stolen?" Before Kate could formulate a response, one of the search team members called out from Margaret's study. "Detective Chun, I think you should see this." The family followed Detective Chun into the study, where an investigator was examining the antique wooden cabinet with sophisticated detection equipment. Kate felt her knees weaken as she realized what they were about to discover. "This cabinet has a hidden compartment," the investigator reported. The wood grain analysis shows a section that doesn't match the surrounding construction. Detective Chun examined the cabinet carefully, locating the hidden mechanism that Kate had accidentally discovered days earlier. The small panel clicked open, revealing the secret compartment and the velvet jewelry box that contained the heritage ring. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret stood frozen as Detective Chun carefully removed the jewelry box and opened it to reveal the ring that had supposedly been stolen weeks earlier. The emerald caught the morning light streaming through the study windows, its brilliance a stark contrast to the darkness of the moment. "Mrs. Margaret Whitmore," Detective Chun said formally, "you are under arrest for insurance fraud and filing false police reports. You have the right to remain silent." As the detective continued reading Margaret's rights, the family stood in shocked silence, each person processing the magnitude of what was unfolding. Alexander appeared genuinely stunned, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning comprehension. Vivian's expression was one of calculating assessment, already considering the legal and public relations implications. James moved to stand beside his mother, his expression combining grief with determination to support her despite her crimes. Kate felt tears forming as she watched the dignified woman who had raised James being handcuffed and prepared for arrest. "Mother, don't say anything until we get you a lawyer," Alexander said, his political instincts overriding his shock. "We'll handle this situation properly." Margaret looked at her sons with eyes filled with shame and regret. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I never intended for things to go this far. I was trying to save the family, and instead I've destroyed everything." As Detective Chun escorted Margaret toward the door, she paused in front of Kate, her eyes conveying a complex mixture of accusation and understanding. "Did you know?" Margaret asked quietly, her voice barely audible. Kate met her mother-in-law's gaze directly. "We tried to convince you to stop before it reached this point." Margaret nodded slowly, recognizing that Kate and James had attempted to offer her a chance for redemption that she had ultimately been unable to take. As the police car drove away from Whitmore Manor, carrying Margaret toward a future of legal proceedings and public disgrace, the family was left to confront the wreckage of their reputation and relationships. The charity gala, scheduled for that evening, was immediately canceled. Alexander spent the morning on the phone with lawyers, political advisors, and crisis management specialists, trying to contain the damage to his career and the family's social standing. Vivian confronted Kate and James in the library, demanding explanations for their prior knowledge of Margaret's guilt and their failure to share that information with the rest of the family. "You knew about this," Vivian said accusingly. "You knew she had hidden the ring, and you said nothing while the rest of us lived in ignorance." James stepped forward to defend his wife. "We discovered the truth only a few days ago, and we tried to convince Mother to confess voluntarily. We hoped she would find a way to resolve the situation without criminal charges. Instead, you let Alexander and me continue supporting a lie," Vivian replied angrily. "You let us make statements to investigators and insurance companies based on false information. We could have been charged as accessories." Kate felt the weight of Vivian's accusations, understanding that their decision to keep the secret had indeed compromised other family members. "We were trying to protect everyone, including Margaret. We thought there might be a way to resolve everything without destroying the family." "Well, congratulations," Vivian said bitterly. "The family is destroyed anyway, and now we all look like either criminals or fools." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Richard Fleming, the insurance adjuster, accompanied by representatives from the company's fraud investigation unit. The discovery of the ring had triggered immediate action to pursue criminal charges and civil recovery for the investigative costs and attempted fraud. "Mr. Whitmore," Fleming addressed Alexander, "will need to conduct formal interviews with all family members to determine the extent of knowledge regarding the fraudulent claim." Alexander realized that his political career was likely over, regardless of his personal innocence. The scandal would follow him for the rest of his life, making future campaigns impossible and damaging his professional relationships throughout the legal and political communities. Over the following days, as Margaret was arraigned and released on bail pending trial, the family struggled to understand how their lives had changed so dramatically. The financial problems that had motivated Margaret's desperate scheme remained unsolved, and now they faced additional legal expenses and the complete destruction of their social standing. Kate found herself in the difficult position of being both the person who had exposed the truth and the family member trying to help everyone heal from the devastating consequences. She spent hours with James, helping him process his conflicting feelings about his mother's actions and his role in her exposure. I keep thinking about what might have happened if we had handled things differently, James said one evening as they walked through the gardens that had once represented family stability and tradition. She was destroying innocent people with her lies, Kate replied gently. The household staff were being investigated for crimes they didn't commit. The insurance company was preparing to pay millions of dollars based on fraudulent claims. Someone had to stop the cascade of harm she was causing. I know you're right, James said. But it still feels like we betrayed her when she needed our support most. Kate took his hand, understanding the complexity of his emotions. We offered her multiple opportunities to confess voluntarily. She chose to continue the deception. At some point, loyalty to family has to be balanced against responsibility to truth and justice. Margaret's trial would take place 6 months later, resulting in a suspended sentence and community service in recognition of her advanced age and previously unblemished reputation. However, the legal consequences were far less damaging than the social and family consequences that would affect all of them for years to come. The Whitmore Manor was eventually sold to pay legal fees and resolve the family's financial obligations. Alexander's political career ended abruptly, though he managed to rebuild his legal practice over time. Vivian divorced him within a year, unable to reconcile herself to the diminished social status and financial uncertainty that became their new reality. James and Kate moved to a modest home in the city, where James found work as a teacher and Kate pursued her graduate studies in social work. The contrast with their previous life of privilege was stark, but they discovered strengths in their relationship that they hadn't realized they possessed. Margaret spent her remaining years volunteering at local charities, attempting to rebuild her reputation through service to others. The relationship between mother and son was permanently changed, marked by a formal politeness that replaced the easy affection they had once shared. The heritage ring was sold at auction to pay restitution to the insurance company, its proceeds insufficient to restore the family's financial stability, but enough to satisfy their legal obligations. The emerald that had been passed down through 5 generations of Whitmore women would grace the finger of a wealthy collector who cared nothing for its history or significance. 5 years after the scandal, Kate and James hosted a small dinner party for the few friends who had remained loyal through their difficult transition. As they cleaned up afterward, Kate found herself reflecting on the lessons they had learned about family, loyalty, and the true meaning of integrity. "Do you ever regret exposing the truth about the ring?" James asked, as if reading her thoughts. Kate considered the question carefully before responding. "I regret that the truth was so devastating for everyone. I regret that your mother felt so desperate that she turned to deception. But I don't regret stopping a lie that was hurting innocent people. Even though it destroyed our family, it revealed the truth about our family," Kate corrected gently. The destruction was already there, hidden beneath the surface. "The ring scandal didn't create our problems, it exposed them." James nodded, understanding that their current life, while far less materially comfortable, was built on a foundation of honesty that their previous existence had lacked. They had lost wealth and social status, but they had gained something more valuable, the knowledge that they could face difficult truths and maintain their integrity even when the cost was devastating. The Whitmore estate was eventually converted into a conference center, hosting corporate events and weddings in the grand rooms where the family had once lived. Visitors admired the architecture and gardens without knowing the dramatic story that had played out within those walls. Margaret's secret compartment was sealed during renovations, but sometimes Kate wondered if future owners would discover it and speculate about what treasures it might once have hidden. The heritage ring was gone forever, but the lessons it had taught about family, truth, and the price of deception would influence the surviving family members for the rest of their lives. In the end, Kate realized Margaret's desperate attempt to preserve the family legacy had achieved the opposite of what she intended. The real Whitmore legacy wasn't wealth or social status. It was the strength to choose integrity over comfort, truth over convenience, and justice over family loyalty when the two came into conflict. The story of the heritage ring became a cautionary tale in their social circle, whispered about at gatherings, and referenced in discussions of family values and financial pressure. But for Kate and James, it was simply the story of how they learned that some secrets are too dangerous to keep, no matter how much pain the truth might cause. Their new life was quieter, simpler, and far less glamorous than what they had known before. But As they built their future on a foundation of honest communication and shared values, they discovered that losing everything material had allowed them to find something far more precious, a relationship based on complete trust and mutual respect. The heritage ring was gone, Margaret's reputation was permanently tarnished, and the Whitmore family name had lost its luster in society. But the truth had prevailed. Innocent people had been protected from injustice, and a new generation had learned lessons about integrity that would serve them well in whatever challenges lay ahead.